They thought no one would ever check the county records. A quiet neighborhood meadow was sold behind closed doors. The buyers weren't strangers. They were friends of the HOA board. And the woman asking questions became their next target. But one public document was about to expose everything. Subscribe, and let's begin the story. The morning air was sharp, and the usual calm of Willow Lane felt fractured, broken by the hum of engines and the clatter of metal stakes driven into soft earth. Emily Carter's eyes widened as she stepped onto her porch, clutching a mug of half-cold coffee, the steam twisting in the chilly sunlight, only to see a group of men in fluorescent vests, methodically measuring lines across Harbor Meadow. Her family's sacred green space now crisscrossed with stakes and ribbons that seemed to mark something forbidden. Her heart sank as she noticed the precision of their movements, the way one of them paused, glanced toward her house, and nodded, almost as if they had been expecting her. The meadow had always been a place of laughter, of Sunday picnics, of her son Noah's small hands brushing against the leaves of the maple tree she and her late husband had planted, and now it looked like a battlefield drawn in bright tape and soil, every marker a silent sentence she couldn't yet read. Emily hurried down the narrow walkway, her boots crunching against gravel, the cold biting through her socks, and approached the foreman, a man with a sun-beaten face and wary eyes. He straightened, clipboard clutched to his chest, and in a voice tight with rehearsed politeness, he told her the meadow was being cleared for a luxury waterfront retreat. Emily felt her knees weaken, a flush of disbelief burning her cheeks as she stammered, citing the HOA records she had pored over countless nights. This land was meant for the community, a promise etched in bylaws, not a transaction for private gain. The foreman's eyes darted sideways, and without answering further, he gestured for her to step back, leaving Emily frozen, staring at the stakes that now desecrated the memory of her husband and the countless afternoons spent watching Noah chase soccer balls across that same grass. Evening arrived like a shadow, the sun dipping behind pines that lined the neighborhood, casting long, skeletal fingers across the pavement. Emily entered the HOA meeting room, the faint scent of polished wood and stale coffee mixing with the tension humming in the air. Chairs squeaked under shifting weight as neighbors whispered in low tones, eyes darting toward the front, where Marjorie Blake emerged, a figure cut from porcelain and steel. Her white hair cropped neatly at her jaw, a pink suit hugging her frame with the perfection of a carefully rehearsed image, and a smile that never reached her eyes. She moved down the aisle with deliberate poise, heels clicking in measured rhythm, and as she reached the podium, silence fell, heavy and watchful, like the calm before a storm. Without raising her voice, her words sliced through the room. Every procedure had been fully legal, every decision carefully reviewed, and anyone who questioned them was merely letting personal feelings cloud their judgment. Emily felt the chill of authority press against her chest, the weight of invisible eyes judging, and for the first time, she realized that fighting alone would be more dangerous than she had imagined. Meanwhile, in the back of the room, Noah fidgeted with his tablet, heart racing, caught between the fear of standing up and the urgency of recording the truth for his science project. He had planned to film the meadow's trees and wildlife, to tell a story of community and growth, but a uniformed guard now blocked the gate, his arms crossed, like a barrier between reality and the world Noah believed in. The boy's eyes met Emily's briefly, a silent plea, and in that instant, Emily understood that the threat wasn't just the land or the board. It was a force determined to erase every trace of what had belonged to them. As the meeting drew to a close, Marjorie's eyes met Emily's across the room, her smile unwavering, but something colder flickered beneath it, a calculated warning hidden in plain sight. Emily felt the first prickle of fear and defiance twist together, a bitter cocktail that made her pulse quicken. The fluorescent stakes in the meadow, the guard at the gate, the perfect pink suit at the front, all pointed to one undeniable truth. This was only the beginning, and as she left the room, clutching Noah's hand, the shadows outside seemed to thicken, stretching across Harbor Meadow like dark fingers, reaching for something precious, leaving Emily with a single, nagging thought that would not leave her. How far would they go to keep her silent? The first neighbor shut the door before Emily could finish, saying Marjorie Blake's name. The second looked past Emily's shoulder like someone might be watching from the hedges, then whispered that she had never received a notice, never signed a ballot, never heard a word about Harbor Meadow being sold, before stepping back into the dark hallway and turning the deadbolt with a trembling hand. By the fifth house, Emily was standing on a porch beneath a flickering lantern, holding a notebook full of half-answers and frightened eyes. Realizing that Pine Harbor was not quiet because people agreed with Marjorie. It was quiet because they were afraid of her. The neighborhood looked peaceful from the outside, with white fences, trimmed lawns, porch swings, and wind chimes turning softly in the ocean breeze. But now every window felt like a hidden camera, and every passing car slowed just a little too much. An elderly man watering his roses told Emily he had once been fined $300 because his trash bins were visible from the street for 22 minutes after pickup. A young mother admitted her family had paid a penalty for painting their front door the wrong shade of navy. Another resident, red-eyed and angry, said Marjorie had threatened to place a lien on his home over a crooked mailbox post, then lowered his voice when a black SUV rolled slowly past the curb. Emily watched the vehicle disappear around the bend, its tinted windows reflecting the pale afternoon sky, and felt the first real shape of Marjorie's power settle over her like a cold hand. That evening, Noah came home from school with dirt on one knee and a forced smile that looked too small for his face. He slipped past Emily before she could ask about his day, hiding his science project tablet under his jacket as if it had become something shameful. At dinner, he barely touched his food, staring at the empty chair where his father used to sit. And when Emily noticed a crumpled piece of paper falling from his backpack, she saw the words written in sharp pencil across the corner of his worksheet. "Meadow freak. Your mom ruins everything." For a moment, the room went silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator, and Emily felt her anger split in two, one half burning for the land behind Willow Lane, the other for the boy trying to swallow his pain so she would not have to carry more. The next morning, Emily walked to the edge of Pine Harbor, where Daniel Reed lived, in a weathered gray house, hidden behind overgrown lilacs. His porch sagged slightly, the paint peeled near the windows, and old law books were stacked inside the front room, like relics from another life. Daniel opened the door in a faded cardigan, silver stubble along his jaw, his eyes tired, but sharp enough to make Emily feel as if he had already guessed why she was there. At first, he refused to help. His voice was low, flat, guarded, the voice of a man who had once fought a battle in public and lost something more painful than the case itself. But when Emily said Marjorie Blake had claimed Harbor Meadow was legally sold, Daniel's hand tightened on the doorframe, and the color drained from his face with such sudden force that Emily forgot to breathe. He led her inside without another word. The house smelled of dust, black coffee, and paper left too long in boxes. Daniel listened as Emily described the survey stakes, the guard at the meadow, the HOA meeting, and the way Marjorie had smiled while making the entire room feel guilty for asking questions. Daniel did not interrupt, but his eyes kept moving toward a locked filing cabinet in the corner, where a yellowed envelope rested beneath a stack of unpaid bills. When Emily asked what he knew, he looked away toward the window, where the pines swayed under a heavy sky, and told her that years ago he had noticed money disappearing from HOA accounts under vague maintenance expenses, landscaping contracts that cost too much, repair invoices signed by companies no one could locate. He had pushed once, quietly, carefully, and within a month, his reputation had been shredded by rumors he could never trace back to anyone's mouth. Emily left Daniel's house with more fear than proof, but fear had started to sharpen into something useful. As dusk settled over Pine Harbor, she passed the clubhouse on her way home and noticed warm golden light spilling through the tall windows. Cars lined the private drive, not the usual residence sedans and family SUVs, but polished black vehicles and expensive coastal plates. Through a gap in the curtains, Emily saw Marjorie Blake standing beneath a chandelier in her flawless pink suit, a glass of champagne in one hand, her white hair glowing under the soft light like polished bone. Beside her stood Victor Lang, the developer whose name Emily had heard from the survey crew, broad-shouldered, silver-haired. Smiling with the easy confidence of a man who believed every locked room would open for him, Emily should have kept walking, but the sight froze her in place. Marjorie leaned close to Victor, not like a board president speaking to a contractor, but like someone sharing a private victory before the rest of the world had been told the game was over. Victor touched the small of her back as they laughed, and then Marjorie lifted her glass toward the dark window, toward the meadow beyond it, toward the homes of people who had not been asked for anything yet, had somehow lost something precious. For one terrible second, Emily saw the whole picture without yet having the documents to prove it. The secret meetings, the silent neighbors, the fake confidence, the land marked in ribbons before anyone had voted. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a deal. By the time Emily reached her porch, the sky had turned black over Willow Lane, and the maple tree in Harbor Meadow was only a thin silhouette against the moonlight. A white envelope waited under her front door, perfectly centered on the welcome mat. Her name was typed across the front in cold block letters, and inside was an official HOA warning printed on heavy paper, accusing her of harassing the board, spreading false information, disturbing community harmony, and creating unnecessary panic among residents. At the bottom, beneath Marjorie Blake's signature, was a fine of $750, payable within 10 days. Emily stood there holding the letter while Noah watched from the hallway, his face pale, his bruised knee half hidden behind the doorframe. The paper shook in her hand, not from weakness, but from the force it took not to break apart in front of her son. Outside, across the dark meadow, the clubhouse lights suddenly went out one by one, until only Marjorie's office window remained glowing pink against the night. Then Emily's phone buzzed with an unknown number, and a single message appeared on the screen. "Stop asking questions, or the next notice won't be about money." The storm hit Pine Harbor just before dawn, ripping shingles from roofs and throwing tree branches across Willow Lane like broken bones. By sunrise, Harbor Meadow was soaked black with rain, the survey ribbons snapping in the wind, and the little maple tree Noah's father had planted bent so low it looked as if the ground itself was trying to pull it under. Emily stood at the kitchen window, still holding the anonymous message on her phone, when the power flickered once, twice, then died, leaving her reflection staring back from the glass like a woman she barely recognized. For 3 days, the neighborhood moved through the storm's aftermath, in a strange, breathless silence. Chainsaws groaned from driveways, gutters overflowed, and county trucks crawled through the streets clearing fallen limbs. But no one spoke openly about Harbor Meadow. Noah sat at the dining table with his tablet and a battery pack, working on his science project, while pretending not to hear the whispers that followed his mother whenever she stepped outside. Emily tried to act steady for him, but every unknown car made her shoulders tighten. Every HOA email felt like a trap, and every glance toward the clubhouse reminded her of Marjorie Blake's pink-lit office window burning in the dark. On the 4th morning, Daniel Reed called before Emily had even poured coffee. His voice was rough, almost breathless, and for a second, Emily thought something terrible had happened to him. Instead, he told her the county's land records portal had been updated overnight after the storm knocked out part of the old server system, and a batch of scanned property documents had appeared online months earlier than expected. Emily grabbed her coat without thinking, kissed Noah on the top of the head, and drove through wet streets shining like broken mirrors, her tires hissing over puddles as the sky pressed low and gray above the pines. Daniel's house looked even older in the storm light, its porch dark with rain, its windows fogged at the edges. Inside, the air smelled of damp paper and black coffee, and the glow from his computer screen carved hard shadows across his face. He did not greet her with comfort or explanation. He simply turned the monitor toward her, and there it was, Harbor Meadow, listed not as a protected community space, not as shared land, not as the heart of Pine Harbor, but as a parcel transferred from Pine Harbor Homeowners Association to a company Emily had never heard of, Rose Bay Holdings, LLC. The sale price sat beneath the name in neat black digits, so low it looked like an insult, a number that made Daniel exhale through his teeth and made Emily grip the edge of the desk until her knuckles went white. For a moment, she could not move. The screen blurred, and all she could see was Noah at 5 years old, kneeling beside his father in the grass, pressing dirt around the roots of the maple tree with both tiny hands. She remembered her husband laughing when Noah named it Captain Maple, remembered sunlight on picnic blankets, elderly neighbors walking their dogs along the path, kids chasing soccer balls through the clover. Now all of it had been reduced to a transaction, sold quietly through a web page. Nobody had been meant to check in time. Daniel clicked deeper into the filings, opening one document after another, and each page seemed to darken the room. The buyer's registered agent led to another record, then another, until the corporate veil thinned just enough to show the names beneath it. Victor Lang and Elaine Blake Mercer. Emily stared at Elaine's name, not understanding at first why Daniel had gone so still. Then he pulled up a local charity board photo from 2 years ago, and there stood Marjorie Blake in a rose-colored suit, one gloved hand resting proudly on the shoulder of a younger woman with the same sharp cheekbones and pale, careful smile. Elaine Blake Mercer was not a stranger. She was Marjorie's niece. The discovery landed with a quiet violence. Emily had expected arrogance, maybe favoritism, maybe greed dressed up as procedure. But this was colder than that. This looked planned. This looked personal. This looked like a family reaching into the middle of a neighborhood and taking what everyone else had trusted them to protect. Daniel kept digging, his old lawyer's instincts waking under the fatigue in his eyes. Then he opened the file that made him stop breathing for half a second. It was a board meeting certification attached to the transfer, claiming Pine Harbor residents had voted in favor of selling Harbor Meadow. Beneath the statement was a list of names and signatures, cleanly scanned, official-looking, almost boring in its confidence. Emily leaned closer, reading the names one by one, and felt confusion twist into something sharper. She knew these people. She had seen them at mailboxes, at school fundraisers, at summer cookouts. None of them had mentioned a vote. No notices had gone out. No ballots had arrived. No meeting had been announced. Daniel's face had turned the color of ash. He tapped the date on the document with one finger and said almost nothing, but his silence told Emily enough. The meeting record looked manufactured, a paper trail built after the decision had already been made. Emily pulled out her phone and began photographing the screen while Daniel downloaded every file he could reach. The deed transfer, the sales contract, the meeting minutes, the signature list, the planning map, the ownership documents connecting Rose Bay Holdings to Victor and Elaine. The printer rattled in the corner, coughing out pages faster than Emily could stack them. Each warm sheet another piece of proof that the meadow had not simply been sold, it had been taken. At home that afternoon, Noah sat on the living room floor with the planning map Emily had accidentally brought in with the printed files. Rain tapped softly against the windows while he traced the neighborhood roads with his finger, searching for the section he wanted to film for his project. Emily was at the kitchen table building folders on her laptop when she heard him stop moving. The silence was so sudden that she looked up at once. Noah was staring at a marked square beside the meadow path, his face drained of color, his lips pressed together in the same way his father's had been when trying not to show pain. The spot where Captain Maple stood, the little tree planted with his father's hands, had been labeled in cold planning text, "Future private parking." Noah did not cry right away. That hurt Emily more. He picked up his tablet, walked to the window, and aimed the camera through the rain toward the blurred shape of the meadow. His voice, when he began recording, was small but steady, telling the story of a tree planted by a boy and his dad before the dad got sick, telling how the tree was supposed to grow with him, end quote. Telling how some grown-ups could erase a memory with a label on a map. Emily stood frozen behind him, one hand over her mouth. Because without meaning to, her son had created the one thing no legal document could show, what the theft actually cost. Then, the doorbell rang. Emily turned slowly. Through the frosted glass, she saw a pale shape on the porch, bright and impossible to miss against the gray rain. Marjorie Blake stood beneath a pink umbrella, wearing another immaculate pink suit, her white hair smooth at her shoulders, as if the storm had no permission to touch her. Emily opened the door only a few inches, enough to see Marjorie's smile, soft and polished and empty. The HOA president looked past Emily for just a moment, toward Noah and the tablet in his hands, then back at Emily, with a calmness that made the air feel colder. She said Emily should think very carefully about her son before continuing, and behind her, parked at the curb with its engine running, was the same black SUV Emily had seen watching the neighborhood the day before. By sunset, Emily's dining room looked less like a home and more like the back room of a criminal investigation. Printed county records covered the table. Noah's science posters leaned against the wall, and the rain-dark windows reflected Emily's face back at her in fragments. Tired eyes, clenched jaw, one hand resting protectively near the folder with her son's video file. Outside, a car rolled slowly past the house without stopping, its headlights washing across the curtains, and every person inside went still before the engine faded down Willow Lane. Emily had invited 20 neighbors. Only 4 came. They arrived quietly, one by one, parking far from the house and walking through the side gate as if they were doing something shameful. Their coats pulled tight, their faces pale with the kind of fear that had lived too long in polite neighborhoods. Daniel Reed sat near the window with his legal pad open, his reading glasses low on his nose, while Emily tried not to look at the empty chairs she had set out with hope. The absence of the others felt louder than any argument. It said Marjorie had already won more than land. She had trained an entire community to whisper. The first hour was full of hesitation. A retired school nurse admitted she had seen survey maps weeks earlier, but had been afraid to ask questions after Marjorie threatened her over a garden trellis. A young father confessed he had deleted Emily's post-draft from his phone because his wife was terrified the HOA would target their mortgage approval. Then Mrs. Helen Brooks arrived late, small and stooped beneath a wool coat, carrying a metal cookie tin pressed against her chest like it held a human heart instead of old paper. She did not speak at first. She simply placed the tin on Emily's dining table, removed the lid, and pulled out a yellowed binder tied with a faded blue ribbon. The room changed when Daniel saw the cover. His chair scraped softly against the floor as he leaned forward, and Emily watched his tired expression sharpen into something almost stunned. Inside the binder were the original Pine Harbor bylaws, typed decades earlier, with handwritten notes in the margins and signatures from the founding residents. Helen's late husband had served on the first HOA board, long before the clubhouse had chandeliers, before Marjorie Blake turned neighborhood rules into weapons, before Harbor Meadow became valuable enough for someone to steal. The paper smelled faintly of dust and cedar, and when Daniel reached the section on community land, he stopped moving. The words were plain, brutal, impossible to soften. Harbor Meadow was permanent, common land, and it could not be sold, transferred, leased, or commercially developed without written approval from at least 80% of homeowners. For a moment, no one said anything. Emily stared at the sentence until it blurred, because this was not just proof that Marjorie had been dishonest. It was proof that every ribbon, every warning letter, every cold smile from the pink suit had been built on a lie. Daniel began comparing the old bylaws with the county documents, page by page, his pen moving faster now, circling dates, cross-checking names, marking contradictions with hard black lines. The deeper he went, the more the room seemed to tighten around them. One signature belonged to a man who had moved to Arizona 2 years before the alleged vote. Another belonged to a woman in assisted living who could no longer write her own name. A third belonged to a couple who had sold their house before Marjorie ever claimed the meeting happened. Then, Daniel stopped. Emily noticed his hand freeze over the signature list. The room grew silent again, but this silence was different, heavier, like everyone was standing at the edge of something terrible. Daniel turned the page slowly toward Emily. There, in a clean blue scan beneath the line approving the sale of Harbor Meadow, was a signature she knew better than her own. Mark Carter, her husband, her dead husband. The letters leaned slightly to the right, the M too sharp, the C too wide, close enough to wound but wrong enough to be obscene. Emily's breath left her body so suddenly that the chair behind her tipped back against the wall. Mark had been gone for 3 years before the date printed on that document. Noah stood in the hallway, unseen until that moment, his face white in the dim light. He had come downstairs for a glass of water and found his father's name on a paper that said he had agreed to erase the meadow where they planted their tree. Emily reached for him, but he backed away, not from her, from the document, from the idea that someone had reached into their grief and used it like ink. His eyes filled, but his voice did not break as he asked how they could make his dad say yes when he was not here anymore. No one in the room answered. No one could. And in that silence, the story stopped being about rules, property, or HOA politics. It became something unforgivable. Upstairs, Noah opened his tablet with shaking hands. Maddie, the girl who had laughed along when others mocked him at school, had sent him a message earlier that day. She had apologized in a rushed, messy voice note, admitting she had only joined in because her mother told her to stay away from the Carter problem, and because everyone at school was repeating things they did not understand. Now she asked if she could help with the science video. Noah almost ignored it, but after seeing his father's forged name, something hardened in him. He sent her the clips of the meadow in the rain, the maple tree bending in the wind, the planning map marked future private parking, and his own small voice telling the story of Captain Maple. Maddie began cutting the footage together from her bedroom across the neighborhood, adding old photos Noah sent quietly from a family album, turning a school project into a witness statement no adult could easily dismiss. Downstairs, Emily sat before her laptop with the county records open beside the original bylaws. Daniel warned her to be careful, but his voice lacked the force to stop her. Helen placed a trembling hand over Emily's and whispered that silence had protected Marjorie for too long. Emily looked at the forged signature again, at the cruel imitation of the man who had loved that meadow, who had carried Noah on his shoulders beneath the maple sapling, who could no longer defend his own name. Then Emily took photos of the county record, the 80% clause, and Mark Carter's impossible signature, and posted them to the Pine Harbor residents group. For 12 minutes, nothing happened. Then, one comment appeared. Then, another. Then 10. Then 40. People who had ignored her messages began typing in all caps, asking why their names were listed, why their dead parents had signed, why no vote had ever been announced. Screenshots spread faster than Emily could read them. Porch lights came on across Willow Lane, one after another, like the neighborhood was waking from a spell. Emily watched through the window as silhouettes appeared behind curtains, phones glowing in their hands, fear slowly turning into anger. Gree. Then a notification appeared at the top of the screen. Marjorie Blake had entered the residents group. For a few seconds, the comment feed stopped completely. Then Marjorie posted one sentence, polished and cold enough to make Emily's skin prickle. Anyone distributing stolen or altered HOA documents will be referred to legal counsel immediately. Before Emily could respond, Daniel's phone buzzed on the table. He looked down, read the message, and his face changed. The county records page they had downloaded that morning was no longer accessible. The file had vanished. The clubhouse doors rattled like they were struggling against the storm outside, though the weather had calmed to a gray drizzle, wheatening the hedges that lined the private drive. Emily's palms were damp, clutching her folder of evidence so tightly the corners dug into her wrists. Chairs were set in neat rows, but the air felt thick, almost suffocating, every neighbor shifting uneasily, their eyes flicking toward the front, where Marjorie Blake appeared as if she had been carved from marble. Her pink suit glowing faintly under the fluorescent lights, white hair perfectly in place, smile, precise and unreadable, a weapon hidden in plain sight. She moved with the ease of someone who had rehearsed control for a decade, and for a heartbeat, Emily wondered if the room would obey her just by looking at her. Victor Lang sat at the front row, broad-shouldered, arms crossed, face a mask of confidence. His presence, more than business. It was a silent intimidation. Marjorie began speaking softly, smoothly, declaring that Emily misunderstood the situation, that the HOA had every right to sell Harbor Meadow to increase property value, that all decisions had been lawful, carefully considered. Above reproach. D. The words fell into the room like polished stones, heavy but somehow contained, designed to quell dissent. A few neighbors nodded, the tension inside them vibrating with a quiet fear, while Emily felt her heart thumping against her chest, a warning she could not ignore. Daniel Reed stood, slow at first, the weight of his former defeats settling over him like wet cloth, then firmer, voice slicing through the air as he presented the original bylaws, the county records, and the forged signatures. He did not just speak. He moved across the podium like a man reclaiming lost ground, letting each document land on the table, heavy as bricks, shaking the confidence in the room. When Emily projected the signature of Mark Carter, her dead husband, on the screen, a tangible silence swallowed the murmurs. The neighbors' faces froze, eyes wide, mouths slightly parted, and even Marjorie's carefully controlled posture flickered for a fraction of a second. A tremor the room noticed, but no one wanted to name aloud. Helen Brooks stepped forward, brittle with age but unyielding in conviction, handing out copies of an old email between Marjorie and Elaine Blake Mercer. The words on the page revealed intentions hidden for years, a plan to remove Harbor Meadow from the community before the county records became public, executed with calculated timing and secrecy. The neighbors leaned forward involuntarily, their fear mingling with outrage, realizing that the transactions had not been mismanaged. They had been orchestrated to deceive, to rewrite history for personal gain. Emily's chest tightened, rage and disbelief coiling together, while Daniel's pen scratched across his legal pad, marking connections, inconsistencies, proof layered like armor around their claims. Noah raised his hand almost shyly, gripping his tablet as if it were a shield. He asked permission to show his science project video. Marjorie's pink suit reflected the dim light, and for a moment she hesitated, almost imperceptibly, before nodding. The lights dimmed, and the first frames revealed the maple tree, the green of Harbor Meadow, under shifting skies. The laughter of children overlaid with clips of Noah, pointing to the maps and stakes, marking future private parking. His narration was soft, but insistent. Recounting afternoons with his father, detailing the life that had been built around that space, the memories erased by signatures on a forged document. He ended with a question that struck every adult in the room. If grown-ups can sell our memories without asking, what does community even mean? The video hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore, drawing whispers that escalated into murmurs and then into voices raised, demanding answers. Neighbors who had remained silent for years now stood as one, asking for a vote, calling for the immediate suspension of the land sale. The room, once orderly and suffocating with controlled tension, became a storm in miniature. Chairs scraping, papers shuffling, breaths held and released in a chorus of urgency and anger. Marjorie's hand twitched slightly, as if she wanted to stop the moment, but found her authority slipping, her usual calm unraveling beneath the force of the truth projected in front of everyone. Daniel, who had for years felt the bitterness of his lost reputation, like a stone in his chest, now felt a rush of clarity and strength. Standing there, watching the residents rally around Emily, he realized that the failures of the past did not define him. He could still fight, still wield the law as a shield for the innocent. Each file he held, each irregular signature he pointed to, each factual contradiction he emphasized, became an instrument reclaiming power for those who had been silenced for too long. Outside, rain had stopped, but clouds still pressed low over the clubhouse, gray and threatening. A faint wind carried the smell of wet earth and pine, and the windows reflected faces alight with determination and fear. Emily noticed Noah sitting upright, eyes wide but firm, shoulders squared as he watched the screen, feeling the first flickers of vindication mixed with the weight of witnessing betrayal. The room had shifted, control had been contested, and for the first time, Marjorie Blake was visibly forced to react, to reckon with the collective will of the residents she had underestimated. As the meeting spiraled into an unanticipated chaos of demands, murmurs, and accusations, a single envelope slid under the front door of the clubhouse, unnoticed at first. Emily's instincts tensed. The envelope was thick, official, and heavy, with the promise of consequences. She could not know yet whether it contained a legal threat, an attempt at intimidation, or something else entirely. But in the sudden pause of all conversation, she realized the fight was far from over. The evidence had shaken the room, but the danger had not left the building. The envelope waited like a coiled snake, silent, inevitable. And in that moment, Emily understood that the storm outside had only been a prelude to the storm within. The envelope did not contain a threat. It contained a receipt number from the county prosecutor's office, stamped in blue ink, with a preservation order attached to every HOA record connected to Harbor Meadow. For the first time that night, Marjorie Blake's face lost its practiced softness, and beneath the pink suit, beneath the perfect white hair, beneath the smile she had used to rule Pine Harbor for years, Emily saw something raw and unmistakable: fear. No one in the clubhouse moved as Daniel read the document. The county had received copies of the deed transfer, the forged meeting minutes, the original bylaws, and the signatures that should never have existed. The vanished records were not gone. Emily's downloads, Daniel's printed files, Helen's binder, and Noah's video had made sure of that. Victor Lang rose from the front row as if the chair had burned him, his lawyer leaning close, whispering fast, while Marjorie stood frozen behind the podium, one hand resting against the wood, as though the whole room might tilt beneath her. The neighbors watched her in silence, not with fear this time, but with the shock of people realizing the powerful only look untouchable until the paper trail catches up. The investigation moved faster than anyone expected. Within days, county officials entered the clubhouse and removed boxes from Marjorie's office, while residents stood along the sidewalk in coats and stunned silence. The same black SUV that had once crawled past Emily's house now sat parked beside a county vehicle, its polished intimidation reduced to an object under watch. Harbor Meadow remained muddy and wounded, the survey stakes still standing like splinters in the grass. But no machines came, no fences went up, no bulldozers arrived before dawn. Instead, Yellow evidence tape crossed the clubhouse archive room, and Marjorie Blake, still dressed in a pale pink suit, walked past her neighbors with her chin lifted too high, pretending not to see the phones recording from every porch. The truth came out in layers, each one uglier than the last. The HOA board under Marjorie had approved the sale without the required vote, then used forged signatures and fabricated minutes to make the deal look legal. Harbor Meadow had been sold far below market value to Rose Bay Holdings LLC, a shell company tied directly to Victor Lang and Elaine Blake Mercer. Elaine tried to push the blame back onto her aunt, claiming she had only followed instructions. But the bank transfers told a different story. The emails told a different story. The timing told a different story. The phrase Helen's husband had saved years earlier, getting the meadow out of residents' hands before the county records became public, became the line people repeated at kitchen tables, on sidewalks, and finally in the hearing room. Emily sat through it all, without feeling the victory she had imagined. She watched Marjorie resign under legal pressure, watched Victor Lang withdraw from the resort project, watched the court void the land sale, and return Harbor Meadow to the community. She watched former board members lower their eyes as they agreed to civil settlements and reimbursement of legal costs. But when the judge declared the transfer invalid, Emily did not think of Marjorie losing power. She thought of Mark's forged signature on that page. She thought of Noah's face when he saw it. She thought of how close they had come to losing something that had held their grief, their childhood summers, their ordinary afternoons, and the quiet proof that a neighborhood could be more than property lines. Daniel Reed changed, too. The man who once kept his law books stacked like memories he did not want to touch began answering calls again, then letters, then knocks at his door from residents who needed help understanding liens, fines, contracts, and threats written in official language. His voice grew steadier each week. He stopped hiding behind the shame of a case that had broken him years before, and began using the law the way Emily had needed him to use it. Not as a weapon for the powerful, but as a shield for people too tired or too frightened to fight alone. By the time Pine Harbor elected a new HOA board, Daniel had opened a small legal advice office near the harbor, with a handwritten sign offering free consultations for seniors and low-income families. Emily did not ask for revenge. At the first meeting after Marjorie's resignation, she stood in the same clubhouse where she had once been humiliated and asked for only one thing: that Harbor Meadow never be put at risk again. With Daniel's guidance, and Helen Brooks sitting proudly in the front row, the residents voted to place the land into a community conservation easement. No future board could sell it. No developer could pave it. No private buyer could turn it into parking spaces, luxury cottages, or a resort with locked gates. The meadow would remain what it had always been meant to be, common ground. A month later, sunlight returned to Pine Harbor in soft gold. The grass at Harbor Meadow was still uneven from the storm, and the old survey marks had left faint scars in the soil, but children ran over them without knowing where the danger had been. Folding tables lined the path with lemonade, cookies, and homemade signs. Neighbors who had once shut their doors now stood shoulder to shoulder, laughing awkwardly at first, then warmly, like people learning how to trust their own voices again. Mrs. Helen Brooks, named honorary member of the new HOA, sat beneath a blue canopy with the original bylaws displayed beside framed photographs of Pine Harbor's early years, her hands folded over her cane, her eyes shining every time someone thanked her. Noah stood near the edge of the meadow with Maddie, both of them holding a small banner for the environmental club they had started at school. His science project had won a special award, not because it was polished or technical, but because it made an entire room understand that green spaces were not empty land. They were memory. They were safety. They were where children learned the shape of belonging. When his video played during the festival, people went quiet again. But this silence was different from the silence Marjorie had created. This was the kind that comes when people finally feel the weight of what almost disappeared. Then Emily saw the new maple sapling. It stood where the old one had been marked for future private parking, its thin branches trembling in the breeze, its leaves bright and delicate against the open sky. Noah knelt beside it, pressing soil around the roots with both hands, just as he had done years ago beside his father. Emily lowered herself next to him, her throat tight, and for a moment, she could almost feel Mark there with them, not as a wound, but as warmth. Around them, Pine Harbor kept moving, children laughing, dogs barking, neighbors calling each other by name, the meadow alive with the sound of something repaired. At sunset, Daniel and two residents lifted a wooden sign into place near the path. The letters had been carved deep and dark into cedar. Harbor Meadow, protected by the people of Pine Harbor. Emily stood with Noah's hand in hers, watching the last light settle across the grass. The land had been saved, but more than that, the spell of silence had been broken. Marjorie Blake had believed power lived behind closed doors, in private meetings, polished lies, and signatures no one would question. But in the end, she was defeated by public records, by neighbors who finally spoke, and by one boy's love for a tree his father planted. Emily smiled through tears as the meadow filled with golden light, knowing Pine Harbor had not only taken back its land, it had taken back its heart. This story reminds us that silence can protect the wrong people, but truth grows stronger when ordinary people choose to stand together. In everyday life, we may not always face something as big as a stolen meadow, but we all know moments when speaking up feels difficult. Sometimes, protecting what matters begins with one question, one document, one honest voice, and the courage to care when it would be easier to look away. If this story moved you, please share your thoughts in the comments. Share this video with someone who needs the reminder, and subscribe for more stories like this. May God bless you and everyone watching.